Hello and welcome, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, story lovers all over the world, to another amazing episode of Never Lost, where we retell and talk about Scots folk and fairy stories so that they will never be forgotten. In this episode, I'm going to talk about the story I told last time, titled The Twa Sisters, or The Bone Harp, or The Cruel Sister. The story has roots reaching back hundreds of years to the 1600s when it was a Scots ballad. This is very common in Scotland, where our storytelling tradition and our music tradition are so closely intertwined that often you can't separate them. Traditional laments and bothy ballads recount stories, and stories are written about tales told in Scots song. It's one of the many things that I really like about the trad music scene in Scotland. I actually first came across the story of the Bone Harp when I heard the song sung by the Scottish folk band The Old Blind Dogs way back in the mid-90s. The ballad has been covered by numerous bands before and since, including Bob Dylan, but the Old Blind Dogs version is still my favourite. So if you like a wee narrative Scots ballad, then look them up on YouTube. The song is The Cruel Sister by the Old Blind Dogs, and the album I think was called Close to the Bone. Anyway, I thought I'd start today by reciting the ballad form of the story. I won't sing it because, with the exception of my wife Sarah and the terminally hard of hearing, nobody wants or needs to hear me sing. So let's sit back and start the earliest ballad form of the Twa Sisters. There lived a lady by the North Sea shore. 2 daughters were, the bairns she bore. As one grew bright as in the sun, so coal-black grew the elder one. A knight came riding to the lady's door. He'd travelled far to be their wooer. He courted one with gloves and rings, but he loved the other above all things. O sister, will you go with me to watch the ships sail on the sea? She took her sister by the hand and led her down to the North Sea strand. And as they stood on the windy shore, the dark-haired girl threw her sister o'er. Sometimes she sank, sometimes she swam, crying, "Sister, reach to me your hand. O sister, sister, let me live, and all that's mine I'll surely give. It's your true love I'll have and more, but thou shalt never come ashore." And there she floated like a swan, the salt sea bore her body on. 'Twa minstrels walked along the strand and saw the maiden float to land. They made a harp of her breastbone, whose sound would melt a heart of stone. They took 3 locks of her yellow hair, and with them strung the harp so rare. They went into her father's hall to play the harp before them all. But when they laid it on the stone, the harp began to play alone. The first string sang a doleful sound. The bride her younger sister drowned. The second string, as they tried, in terror sits the black-haired bride. The third string sang beneath their bow, and surely now her tears will flow. That was the words of the original ballad that the many prose versions of the Twa Sisters or the Bone Harp has been adapted from. I think it's a brilliant story. The written version that I told is obviously far more detailed and it has a few notable additions to the ballad version, but the basic themes of the tale are the same. The fall of the dark-haired sister into blind jealousy, which culminates with her murdering her fair sibling. Then the bones of the murdered girl being made into a harp, which ends up singing the details of her sister's crime at her wedding. Most of the written Scots versions go on to have the dark-haired sister take her own life at the end of the story, making an already sorrowful tale even more tragic. Fewer versions, though, contain 2 of the additions that I included. The fair-haired sister possibly being saved, or at least having her spirit saved by Selkies, and the dark-haired sister perhaps transforming into a forlorn cormorant before she hits the waves and searching for the spirit of her murdered sister. These are very likely later additions, made to ease the tragedy of the story, but I really like the imagery that they evoke. And also I'll use any excuse to include a selkie in my story because I love them. I think they're an amazing magical creature and far more dynamic and interesting than mermaids. Another notable difference between the ballad and the prose version is the manner in which the fair sister meets her end. A lot of the English and European versions of this story stay closer to the ballad, and they have the fair sister pushed into the sea, or a lake, or a river. But in the Scottish story, we get this awful scene on the shoreline where the dark-haired sister ties her younger sibling to the seaweed attached to the rocks, and then stands back and watches as the tide slowly covers her. As horrible as the imagery in that scene is, I think it's important in the story because it narratively reinforces the guilt that the dark-haired sister feels after the act that will eventually lead her to jump from the top of the cliffs into the sea. For a character to be driven to that sort of extreme action by remorse, I think we needed an act more severe than just pushing her sister into the water. It showed that this wasn't just a snap decision done in a moment of anger by the dark-haired sister. It was a planned act done with premeditation. She may have been blinded by pride and jealousy, but she acted with a cold, callous nature that justifies the extreme guilt that she feels. I mentioned other English and European versions of the story, and there are many out there, but the Scottish version rings truest for me because it's the most tragic. I've read versions of the story where the younger sister comes back to life after the song is played by the Bone Harp, although how exactly that happens when significant portions of her remains have been fashioned into a musical instrument is conveniently overlooked. I've also seen versions where the line from the ballad, "and there she floated like a swan," is taken literally, and the younger sister is transformed into a swan before she drowns, although her body still washes up on the shoreline to be found by the bard and made into a bone harp. The idea of an instrument made from someone's remains, which goes on to reveal the foul nature of the person's death, is the main theme in the Twa Sisters. But it's not unique. There are other stories which use a similar motif, and the Arne Thompson Uther Index catalogues the story as type 780 under the heading "The Truth Comes to Light." The most well-known story of this type is probably Jacob and Wilhelm Grimm's tale "The Singing Bone," which I will briefly retell. So without further ado, let's sit back and start this story. Once upon a time, in a certain country, there was great concern about a wild boar that was destroying the peasants' fields and killing the cattle, and ripping people apart with its tusks. The king promised a large reward to anybody who could free the land from this plague, but the beast was so large and so strong that no one dared even to go near it, or even the woods where it lived. This actually immediately puts me in mind of the Ermanthian boar from Greek mythology. It was the fourth task of Hercules in his 12 tasks, I think, when he had to capture this huge boar that was terrorizing the lands of Mycenae and bring it back to the king. But that's not important. Finally, the king proclaimed that whoever could capture or kill the wild boar would have his only daughter's hand in marriage. Now in this country there lived two brothers, sons of a poor man. They declared that they dared to attempt the task. The older one, who was crafty and shrewd, did so out of pride. The younger one, who was innocent and simple, did so because of his kind heart. The king said, in order to be more sure of finding the beast, you should enter the woods from opposite sides. Thus the older one entered the woods from the west, and the younger one from the east. After the younger one had walked a little while, a dwarf stepped up to him. He held a black spear in his hand, and he said, "I am giving you this spear because your heart is innocent and good. With it, you can confidently attack the wild boar, and it will do you no harm." He thanked the dwarf, put the spear on his shoulder, and walked on fearlessly. Before long he saw the beast, and it snorted and pawed the ground before charging at the young man. But he held his spear towards it, and in its blind fury the boar ran straight into the spear with such force that its heart was slashed in two. So the second brother puts the monster on his back and turns towards home, intending to take it to the king. His brother, entering from the other side of the woods, came to a house where people were making merry and drinking wine and dancing. Thinking that the boar was not likely to run away anytime soon, he decided to have a drink himself, to give himself some courage. When he saw his younger brother coming out of the woods, with the boar slung over his back, his evil heart gave him no peace, and envy consumed him. He called out to his brother, "Come in, dear brother, rest and refresh yourself with a beaker of wine." The younger brother, suspecting no evil, went in and told his brother all about the good dwarf who had given him the spear with which he had killed the boar. The older brother kept him there until the evening, and then they set off together for the king's castle. After dark, they came to a bridge over a brook, and the older brother let the younger go first. When the younger brother reached the middle, above the water, the older gave him such a blow from behind that he fell down, dead. He buried him beneath the bridge, and took the boar from himself, delivering it to the king, pretending that he had killed it. With this, he received the king's daughter in marriage. When his younger brother did not return, he said, "The boar must have killed him," and everyone believed him. But as nothing remains hidden from God, this black deed was also to come to light. After many long years, a shepherd was driving his herd across the same little bridge, and he saw a snow-white bone lying in the sand below. Thinking that it would make a good mouthpiece for a horn, he climbed down, and picking it up, he carved it into a mouthpiece. When he blew into it for the first time, to his great astonishment, the bone began to sing all by itself. "O my dear simple shepherd, blowing on my little bone, my dearest brother murdered me when we were here alone. He buried me beneath the bridge, right beside the water, all to get the wild boar and win the king's own daughter." Now the shepherd had no idea what the bone horn was singing about, but he knew that it must be a miraculous and valuable thing. "What a wonderful horn," said the shepherd. "It sings all by itself. I must take it to the king." When he brought it before the king, the horn again began to sing its little song. The king understood well what the horn was singing about, and he had the earth beneath the bridge dug up. Then the whole skeleton of the murdered man came to light. The wicked brother could not deny the deed. He was sewn into a sack and drowned alive. After all, this is a grim fairy tale. The murdered man's bones were laid to rest in a beautiful grave in the churchyard. That's the end of the Brothers Grimm's tale, The Singing Bone. There are a lot of similarities to the Bone Harp. Again, we see a sibling murdered and a magical musical instrument made from their bones. Both stories also end very much on a down note. There are no happily ever afters in these stories. The Singing Bone, though, doesn't contain the same theme of guilt that the Bone Harp does. The wicked brother goes on with his life, marries the princess, and doesn't give his dead brother a second thought until his crime is revealed and he finally gets what he deserves. So the final story that I'll retell, which uses the same theme, comes from India and is probably the most shocking, at least to our Western sensibilities and views. It's called The Cannibalistic Brothers. A very long, long time ago, somewhere within the many kingdoms of India, there lived 6 brothers and a sister on a small farm. Their mother and father had passed some years ago, and the domestic chores of the house fell to the sister. All of the cleaning and the washing and the cooking was done by her, while her brothers worked their small amount of farmland, which yielded just enough to feed the family. One day, while the sister was preparing dinner, she cut her hand quite badly while chopping vegetables directly into the cooking pot. Some of her blood splashed into the pot, tainting the stew. But not wanting to waste the meal, the sister served it to her brothers anyway. When the 6 brothers come in from the fields, they sit down for dinner and eagerly devour the stew, declaring that it's the most delicious thing that they have ever eaten. The brothers ask their sister what she used that day that was different from usual. Reluctant to tell them that they had just greedily consumed blood stew, the sister at first tells them that the stew was the same as it had always been. However, the brothers persist, and eventually she tells them how she'd cut herself and the only extra ingredient had been her own blood. When she tells them this, the brothers are overcome with something referred to as blood madness, and they decide they must kill and eat their sister, apart from the youngest brother, who's not really into it. The brothers know that what they want to do is a terrible crime, and there would be no way to hide it from the youngest brother, so they implicate him in their crime. The other 5 brothers put a bow in his hand and force him to shoot the arrow which kills their sister. Next, we'll skip the gory details, but they do eat her, and then they bury her remains in an unmarked grave on the edge of their farmland. A great tree grows from the soil around where their sister was buried, and months later a travelling minstrel is passing by on his way to play for the king, and he uses the wood from the tree to make a rebec, which is a kind of Eastern fiddle. When the minstrel plays the fiddle for the king, the instrument sings the sad tale of the murdered sister. The minstrel drops the fiddle in shock, and it cracks on the ground, but when it does, the instrument transforms into the sister. She's standing before the king, resurrected. The king was moved by the sister's song, and also quite taken with her charm and good looks, so he takes the young woman as the queen of his heart. The story doesn't mention how many other queens the king has, but monarchs in India at the time often took more than one wife for political reasons. The next year, there was a great drought in the land, and the farmers all over the kingdom went hungry. The 6 brothers came to the king's castle begging for food when their crops failed and they couldn't feed themselves. When they are brought before the king, the sister is there. The youngest brother, who never wanted to eat his sister and felt true guilt over what he and his brothers had done, confesses the crime and asks for and is given forgiveness. The other 5 brothers wilt under the accusing stare of the queen and literally shrink into the earth with shame. That's the end of that slightly disturbing folktale from India. The parallels with our other stories are obvious. The murdered sibling, the instrument fashioned from the remains, or in this case a tree which sprang from the remains. The main difference in this tale is that the sister is resurrected and faces her killers, seeing justice for herself, and obviously the inclusion of cannibalism. This is a theme which we seldom see in Western folktales. It does appear occasionally, although not as overtly as we see it in this story. I wonder whether the prevalence of vegetarianism in the East for cultural and religious reasons explains this. The eating of flesh of any sort was a crime within Hinduism, Jainism, and Buddhism, so that could give this crime an even greater impact in the story. Anyway, I'd like to finish up today with a narrative poem version of the Bone Harp, which I've written. So sit back, and I call this the Selkie o' the Clyde. Nae lang ago I went for a walk, just a merry little tour, along the shoreline and the rocks near the castle at Dunure. The sun was high, the sky was blue, as I listened to the tide. There was a mighty bonny view across the Firth o' Clyde. I spotted something in the water that the waves seemed to conceal. At first I thought it was an otter, but realised it was a seal. It moved without making a sound, as it came towards the beach. Its sleek grey head bobbed up and down as it stopped just out of reach. The seal looked up and sniffed the air, then nodded in my direction, and it gave me such a stare, full of meaning and connection. I looked into its big brown eyes, and it looked into mine, and then words began to materialize somewhere deep within my mind. Longer ago than I care to admit, I once sat there where you now sit. My sister then was by my side, and we gazed out at the Firth o' Clyde. It looked much the same as it does today. There were seals, or selkies, who can say? Gulls were wheeling in the air, and my sister stroked my gowden hair. We were close as any two girls can be, my dearest dark-haired sister and me. We were daughters o' the king and queen, and the happiest children you've ever seen. We often walked the beach's sand, joking and laughing hand in hand. We sat upon those very rocks, and she'd stroke my hair while she sang or talked. We grew from girls into maidens pure within the castle at the Nure. 'Twas like we two were bound and tethered, so much time did we spend together. The thing I always think about, the thing I just can't figure out, is how two sisters and two best friends could come to such a tearful end. It started when the young knight arrived, though at the time I didn't realise. He came to court my sister dear, and made his true intentions clear. He wooed her heart with gifts and things, with pretty silks and silver rings, with promises and moonlit walks along the beach and that place on the rocks. My dark-haired sister fell for the knight, who was handsome and gallant, at least at first sight. He talked the right talk, and he said the right things, and my father did say he might make a good king. My dark-haired sister was clearly smitten. If there was a love bug, then she had been bitten. But while courting my sister for all to see, the gallant young knight was falling for me. I told him we could never be together, in the garden by the blooming heather. I liked him as a brother, any more was but a dream, and my sister soon would love him as his wife and his queen. We embraced and then we parted, not knowing all that we had started. For in a window far above, my sister spied on her true love. She saw mine and the knight's short meeting, saw us in the garden speaking. She couldn't know what words were said, but I ken what went through her head. My sister has betrayed me and is trying to steal my man. Oh, how could my dear sister be so cruel and underhand? She kens I love that brave young knight, who's mine by betrothal and wooing right. She seethed in green-eyed jealousy, alone in her room, thinking of her woes and her awful misfortune. Steeped in envy and in pride, she did curse me and berate me, and in her darkest moments she must have grown to hate me. With clouds of anger and pride to blind her, she left the girl I knew behind her, while she gathered griefs like storms around her. The most terrible of notions found her. She came to me, all sweetness and guile, with secrets hidden behind her smile. She said, "Come, sister, let's take a walk along the beach and past the rocks." So we sisters went along the shore, as we had so many times before. No malice could my heart discern, as the tide began to turn. Hand in hand we walked the beach until that rocky spot was reached. "Oh, sister, will you sit with me and lay your head upon my knee? We've walked the shore for so long. Come sit, and I shall sing a song." I laid my head upon her lap and soon became aware of the gentle touch of her hand as she softly stroked my hair. She sang a quiet, lilting lullaby, as sweet as a bird and as soft as a sigh. Before long I was fast asleep, as higher and higher the tide did creep. Then she began to gently twist my hair around her fingertips. She tangled and tied my golden locks to the seaweed on those cursed rocks. When I woke, my hair was tied on tight with kelp and seaweed and envy and spite. Try though I did, I couldn't get free as the waves began to cover me. The tide was rising all around me, soon to smother, choke, and drown me. Oh, how could my sister so forsake me? She stood back and watched the ocean take me. However, although I drowned that day, my body washed up, far away. Sad and bedraggled, tattered and scarred, it was found by a travelling bard. Pity swelled within his chest, and he would lay me down to rest. But before he placed the marker stone, he made a clarsach from my bones. From my poor body, which he had found, he made my breastbone the clarsach's crown. The legs were tipped with my knees and elbows. The levers were made from my fingers and toes. He strung the harp with my golden hair, and when plucked the notes hung in the air. A clarsach made with parts of me, that's how the Bone Harp came to be. The bard went on to seek his fame, and after not too long he came upon Dunur's proud castle steading, where there was to be a royal wedding. My sister and her brave young knight were to be wed the following night. The bard was quickly hired to play for my sister's wedding day. The next day all the guests were there. The groom was waiting, looking fair. My dark-haired sister, cruel and vile, was ready to walk down the aisle. The bard, he placed the bone harp down upon Dunur's castle ground. Then soft as a whisper, but clear as a shout, all by itself the harp sang out. All those who listen, now take heed, as I tell ye o' an awful deed, done in jealousy and pride, by the hand o' this fair bride, by the hand o' this fair bride. She thought her sister might steal her man, so cruelest murder the bride did plan. She took her sister to the sea. I ken it's true, for the sister's me. I ken it's true, for the sister is me. She laid my head on her knee there, and softly stroke it my golden hair. She sang a song both slow and sweet, until my een were closed in sleep, until my een were closed in sleep. Then she twisted my golden locks into the seaweed o' the rocks, and as the tide began to rise, she stood aside and watched me die. She stood aside and watched me die. The guests could scarce believe their ears, as my sister fled in sobs and tears. Out of Dunur castle she did run, for everyone now kenned what she'd done. As tears of guilt fell from her eyes, she ran towards the cliffs nearby. Then for the crime o' killing me, she flung herself into the sea. Now maybe you're wondering how I can be here when my sister killed me long ago in jealousy and fear. It's true my body washed away after I was drowned, and was made into the bone harp after it was found. But before I breathed my final breath, before the moment of my death, the Selkies came and took my soul and saved the life my sister stole. With that, the Selkie simply vanished, as though it never had been there, like a spirit that was banished into the empty summer air. I stood up from the rocks and looked across the Firth of Clyde, gathering my scattered thoughts of how that poor young girl had died. It's awful hard to understand, and even harder to explain, but I know walking on that sand will never be the same again. Okay, that brings us to the end of another episode. Please, if you enjoyed that, leave a like and feel free to leave any feedback in the comments section. Thank you all for joining me, and I very much hope to see you next story.